So we're on day two of the Alec Baldwin trial, and then today I would consider it bullets, gun, and then detective on the scene. Welcome to the Roundup, True Crime with Mike. Here I give you an update to current cases so you can quickly catch up on today's or this week's happenings on some public cases. I'm joined here with Lydia. So before I get started, I'd like to thank you. Lydia does most, if not all, of the our thumbnails and art for this channel. So thank you very much for everything you do. So let's go ahead and get started with day two. I guess I just wanted to summarize. We saw four witnesses today that, if I could count, I think I only need one hand to count them all. We ended with we started with the end or the cross examination of Poppell. She was the crime scene tech. She started yesterday. Then we had Pieta, who was the one of the Italian founders of the gun company that made the gun. So his company made the gun. His company was the importer. We'll get to that in a second. And then we had a marketing guy for Pieta that distributes the guns. And then the last of the day, we ended with Detective Hancock. Let's start with the two probably people that I don't think were too important, but they're just used to establish a chain of custody for the gun. Pieta, as I said, is the gunman. He and his brother run the gun company in Italy that make the gun that was used on the set. So he talked about the manufacturing process. He talked about how quality control works on the gun, and then they send it to a third party that makes sure the gun is working before they send it to the U.S. Um, Anything else you want to add about him?
I just thought it was interesting that they went straight to the source on the gun. I thought that was a great move. It reminded me of in the Karen Reed trial, getting the guy who wrote the software that was so badly misinterpreted, because I think a lot of the PR around Alec Baldwin has been that he didn't pull the trigger and that the gun just can fire without pulling the trigger. So I just thought that was a great strategy on the part of the prosecutor. And I was impressed and surprised, I guess, that that even happened today.
Correct, and that's what he was there for. He was only there to make sure that he kind of talked about, well, could you throw the gun against the wall and would it go off? And he's
Right.
like, no. I guess if people that don't know guns, this is a single action gun, and one of those ones where you like. I remember from when you're a 6-year-old and you had those pop guns, the
Right.
ones with the red paper that you as a kid. You pull back the hammer, click it, and then once it's pulled back is when you pull the trigger on that type of gun. So you have to do both. And his
Hmm.
argument was that both, like, even if it was cocked, you would have to pull the trigger. So the other
Right. And
guy,
he was,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say he was such a, just his credibility was so obvious, and it was a good move, I thought.
Okay. The other guy was Justin Neal. I guess he works in the EMF. He is in the distribution company for Pieta Guns. He just was there to make sure, hey, I received the gun from Italy. We had it for trade shows, and then we sold it to PDQ, which is Seth Kenney's production company. So it's just establishing a chain of command to say between 2016 and like 2018 or whatever, maybe a little bit later, that the gun was not malfunctioned. So
Right.
okay, let's go over the big cross examination from today, and that was, I always forget her name, Marissa Poppell.
Yeah.
So she was the crime scene tech. I talked a little bit yesterday. She was the one that put all those placards on the floor at the church. She was the one that did our search warrants on the prop truck, on the prop stand itself. And then we learned today she also was part of the search warrant and investigation into the PDQ how our storage warehouse where Seth Kenney stores his guns and his weapons and all the other stuff that he gives to production companies. So I guess, I mean, the cross. I think actually this was one that this defense did get some light punches into, because I think she got a little tired at the end of the day and was a little weary, um, because what happened was one of the big things was that they got the search warrant to go to the Seth Kenney's warehouse, and they did a search, and they're like, well, how did you search it? Well, we had 4 rooms. We kind of just split it up. We'd go into a room, we'd shake a box, or we look at the box contents, and we determine, okay, is that a gun? Their primary interest was answering the question is, how did a loaded bullet get onto the set of Rust? So they're trying to figure out, did Seth Kenney's company provide the live bullets? And so they would open up any boxes that said ammo. They would check to see if it was a 45 caliber weapon. They would shake the boxes. And so I guess the defense was kind of saying, well, did you really do 100% on the job? That was their big counter argument today, was like, were you really like did you really care where the bullet came from, or were you just trying to go after Alec Baldwin? So is that what the opinion that you got from the cross today?
Yeah, I felt like I think the only option the defense had with her and with that search was, I mean, I think they exercised it to the best of their ability, but to me, it was an attempt at the CSI effect. So they were trying to say, you should go in there in hazmat suits with white gloves, and you should carefully, with tweezers, pick up every object in the room, and all of this. And I think, just as a reasonable person, if I'm pretending I'm on the jury, that doesn't really mean anything to me, because I know doesn't that's not how it works in real life. And I felt like she did get flustered. I agree with you. Who wouldn't have by the end of that long day? But I felt like she pushed back in the sense that she said, we did a normal search, like the normal kind of search that we do every day in our jobs. We did a reasonable search. She kept saying, wasn't that the word she used?
Yeah,
Reasonable.
reasonable.
Yeah, she said, we did a reasonable search. And if you pick up a bag and it's full, at one point she said, if you pick up a bag and or a box and it's full of clothing, and you kind of dig through the box and all you see is clothing, there's not ammunition in there. So it's just like she's saying, use your head, buddy. This is what we did. And he was trying to be all CSI, Perry Mason combo of having a gotcha moment where she didn't pick something up with tweezers, which I thought was kind of ridiculous. But I understand where he was going, and I understand that that's kind of the angle that they had to exploit. I get it. I don't think it would have worked on me as a juror.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't think so either, because I mean, it wasn't like the state is not saying that Alec Baldwin brought the bullets to the
Right.
set. So they're not really curious about who brought it. I mean, that's more I guess the only thing is,
Right.
like, did they do their full job? So
Yeah.
I mean, so it's definitely, yeah. So I mean, they're not trying to say that Baldwin brought is the one that's responsible for bringing the bullets. I mean, it'd be a lot easier case if he was the one that brought live bullets, that we wouldn't
Sure.
probably
If
be
they were in
here.
his
He'd have,
pocket.
yeah.
Yeah. But you felt like she was credible, right? Like that's somebody that you kind of automatically trust her opinion. She was, for the most part, very unflappable and seemed to know what she was talking about.
Yeah, she lost some credibility, as they said at the end with
Mhm.
So they were trying, like, so the big story I guess we didn't talk about was that somebody, after, I think after Hannah had already been charged, or I think it was even after the trial, somebody came in and said, well, I found this green camo box. It looks like it's the bullets from the set. Is it? And it was from, like, but she was like, well, I mean, it's so late that I don't believe the story. And she's like, it's not my decision. I just turn it over to my lieutenant or somebody above me, and they make the
Right.
decision. But she was kind of like hesitant and saying, well, like,
Yeah.
because it would be like a kind of not. I mean, we always talk Brady or Gigley or whatever, that if somebody brings in some bullets that could have been from somewhere else, that they need to turn over that investigation to the defense. And but since it's before the trial, it's not really a Brady violation. So
Well, and also you feel this hesitance from her and witnesses in other trials to be very careful to only say what they are 100% sure of. And it would be hard. I mean, that would be hard for me because I would just want to say what I would want to say. But you could feel her saying, well, I can't say that for certain. So I'm not going to say it. Like she was being very measured. about that,
Yeah.
and I think that probably for some people, that probably introduces some doubt about what she's saying, but to me, it felt like she was just being very careful to technically tell the truth.
Correct. But see, I mean, I guess to get a point, the we'll talk about it more later. The issues with this trial, I don't think it really depends on who brought the bullet in. It's
I
just
agree.
totally on Alec Baldwin's actions, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes. So
Yeah.
that was her cross on redirect. I don't think I heard it, but what I heard was the summary was that. Um, did you listen to that the redirect on it?
On her?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what was? Can you give a summary of the redirect?
Um, so for you mean when the prosecutor got to redirect?
Yes.
Yeah, so she made the points that we just talked about. Was Alec Baldwin even accused of bringing the live rounds onto the set? Making that crystal clear that that wasn't part of the charges, it wasn't part of the crime, it isn't an element of negligence or manslaughter or any of those things. She was very, very clear about that. She was extremely good about the Good Samaritan testimony. So on cross, when the defense said, "Oh, so this Good Samaritan just shows up and brings you bullets and you don't even do anything about it. And you don't, go full CSI on that. What's that about? You must be, hiding something," is what he was saying. And on redirect, we get the I hate this word. I hate it, the B word, bombshell. But we
Yeah.
get this kind of bombshell from the prosecution where they say, "Oh, so isn't it true that the Good Samaritan who just happened to find this ammunition is actually like Hannah Gutierrez's dad's best friend who
Oh, I guess
just
yes. Yeah.
happened to bring in some ammunition that he felt might have been the live rounds on set." I mean, you could feel like a collective gasp when she said that because I mean, I didn't know that before she said it on redirect. I don't think anybody we've been talking to today knew that before she said it on redirect. But since it was such a huge part of Cross where he said, "Oh, you're just ignoring the fact that the actual live rounds came from a Good Samaritan who just found this ammunition and brought it into you." And then the prosecutor's like, "Yeah, no, so that's completely shady. Hannah Gutierrez's dad's BFF brought that in to try to,
Uh,
get Hannah out of trouble." And it was wild. That was a wild moment today. That there were 2 wild moments
yeah.
today. That was one of them.
Okay. Let's talk about so around 1 o'clock my time, Mountain Time, local time. There, they did
Mhm.
a kind of an in hearing in camera hearing
Yes.
because they were going over some statements that whether or not they could come in. So they were talking about some Alec Baldwin statements that he made to one of the detectives, and they went. I mean, it's tedious. They're going like, well, line
Mhm.
11. Can we bring 11 in? Well, yes, but not 12. But is 13
Right.
okay? So they were doing that because Baldwin, of course, had a talk to the police officer like that afternoon, or yeah, that afternoon into evening, and some of the statements were kind of like, I mean, it's nothing. And he never I mean, he never said anything too bad, but he was always like, well, I'm kind of upset my wife isn't going to come in, or he told the cops, well, this is going to ruin my career. So there's statements that make it look really bad for him because it makes it look like he was just looking after his career and he didn't really care about Hutchinson and what had happened earlier that day. So those are the statements. One of the things that kind of surprised everybody and gave the prosecutor and the defense kind of like what the W2F look was that Baldwin just got up and walked out of the courtroom while they were arguing it. I think he was just trying to use the restroom. So it was but the way they acted, nobody knew, and they're like, "Where are you going?" And then he came back like 2 minutes later and sat back down, and things kind of continued. So, um,
Well, what was so interesting about that though is I can't remember if you were watching live at this point, but the what she was saying right then was so very important. So she said she's trying to introduce this one portion of his police interview in. And of course, the defense is saying, no, it's more prejudicial than probative. And she says, no. This particular statement where he says, I'm basically old and I can't rely on luck anymore, and this is going to damage my career and my income, and I have kids, blah, blah, blah. This particular statement gives him the motivation to lie about pressing the trigger. And he jumps up out of his seat and yeets out of the courtroom. And everybody's like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And then he comes back. And the reason we talked about this today, but the reason I don't think he had to go to the bathroom is he comes back with a drink in his hand. And he wasn't gone that long, but he quickly goes out. He comes back with a drink, and everyone is stunned. You can tell people in the courtroom are stunned, people who were watching were stunned.
Yeah.
But it was what she was saying at that time that was so interesting, because he had, in my opinion, been extremely agitated for about that entire, I don't know what you, I don't, it's not a voir dire, but when they were trying to get out these issues without the jury in the room, he was very antsy. So he went from nappy McNapperson, falling asleep, yawning, all of that, to during this portion where they're trying to admit evidence, shifting around. He looked upset. He was kind of glaring daggers at the prosecutor. And then he just jets out of the courtroom when she said, here's his motivation to lie about pressing the trigger. That was something else.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to the fourth witness, because this one is a very important one that we only got about like an hour into. And this was Detective Hancock. She was a detective on the Santa Fe police force, and she said she arrived there somewhere between 2:30 and 3. She was at the beginning not the primary detective. She was secondary. But then she transferred to, or she got, I don't know if it's a promotion or whatever, to the primary one after a few weeks. She said, so her responsibilities that were key is she had to interview Hannah, Halls, and Alec Baldwin that afternoon and evening. So they're very key witnesses. Unfortunately, we really didn't get into any of those interviews that I remember. We talked about the prop master. And if you don't remember, prop master was Sarah. And so
Right.
their armor and the prop master work together. Like the armor is responsible for just the bullets, where the prop master is kind of over all props. But because they also include guns and bullets, the prop master is also kind of like responsible for anything. And and in this case, the prop master was the one who went to Seth Kenney's. She was kind of the liaison with Seth Kenney's company to get the bullets and get the guns in the first place. So that she also played a big role. So it was talking about her reaction or her relations with Sarah and the things that had happened. So I think that was where we kind of were finishing up today.
And she's coming back tomorrow, right?
Correct.
Okay. That was some interesting testimony in Hannah Gutierrez's trial. So I think it will also be interesting here, but I'll be interested to see what happens tomorrow for sure.
Correct. She'll finish up on direct and then cross. So as we said about the things that are going to, she was the one who did the interview. So she's going to be able to bring in those quotes.
Right.
Or on the video where it says, well, I'm only thinking about my career, or that I'm only thinking about my wife and family. I don't really care about Helena or not. So it'll be interesting tomorrow.
It will be, because for me, the important part of his police interview, and I watched the whole thing a couple of months ago, the most important part of his police interview is he actually has quite a bit of knowledge about the way dummies work, the way guns work, what happens to a dummy in a gun. And I think that police interview is kind of his undoing, because they can't go in with he's just an actor. He just does he just uses what people hand him. He doesn't know anything. Contrast that with what he says in his police interview, and you have a conflict.
Yeah, one of the big things he said is that he knew, even though you're firing a dummy, he knew that there's a projectile that's dangerous even up to a few feet. Not like a real bullet, for example, but he knew that the flashbang can create heat. He knew that somebody, if they were standing within 2 or 3 feet, could potentially get hurt or even killed
Yeah.
from even a dummy bullet. So, I mean, and he was like, well, I've been shooting guns on sets for 20
Uh-huh.
years, all the way back for when I shot Sean Connery in Hunt
Right.
for Red. Actually, he didn't shoot Connery; he shot the other guy. But
But it's
yeah,
in direct conflict with what his team has set up. And actually, in his interview, it's kinda interesting 'cause there's been some confusing testimony, I think, about what is a dummy, what is a blank. I don't think everybody explains it that well. What's interesting about his police interview is he actually explains it really well, like, in
that's
lay terms, and that's a problem, I
yeah.
think.
I mean, knowing the difference that one shoots,
Mhm.
that a blank actually shoots.
Yeah,
It says the projectile goes a few feet, and it's paper or something. But the whole purpose of that one is that the gunpowder is in the gun see
right,
it's in the shell casing, and
right.
it goes off to give the sound. But then the
But there's
paper,
no projectile, right.
some type of paper is what actually comes out instead of the bullet. Like, and that, I
But
guess the whole
he
thing, the problem is a bullet is actually the whole thing, and a bullet has
Mhm.
the primer, it has the gunpowder, and it has the projectile.
Yeah,
But we use bullet to also mean the projectile too. So
right, you
like
should yeah, you should really say cartridge and not bullet because the bullet is just the end piece. But he not only explains the mechanics of how all of those things work, he clearly describes that he can visually and auditorily identify the difference between all of those. So, again, if you're saying he's just a dumb actor, somebody says cold gun, he wouldn't know a real bullet from a dummy if it bit him, is just not true. And so they're gonna have to deal with that because the prosecutor's gonna say, "Yeah, you did know, and here's what the safety protocols say before you bring a gun on the set, and here's what everybody's supposed to do," and
mm,
yada, yada, yada. So, the
right,
police interview
yeah.
is big deal.
And then, like, in the last part, even like in that clip I showed yesterday, he's like, "Well, do I fire camera left or camera right?" So I mean, he knew that he was supposed to point
Mhm.
somewhere else. And the question, I mean, he was supposed like he's been involved enough to know that when you're just blocking the scene and you're not like you shouldn't even be using the prop. Like when you're
Right.
just blocking, you can use a stick or
Right, or
but
your hand.
sorry. Okay, let's go over the big news that we heard today. I don't know if it's true or not, but we heard that Hannah is going to testify tomorrow.
Yes.
And so the problem with Hannah is, I mean, as if just refreshing everybody's our memory, she was charged and she's guilty of the same charge, the felony involuntary manslaughter. She got the 18 months ago, or 18 months of a sentence. But in between the trial, the state said, "Well, we're going to bring her onto the stand and try her and have her talk." But her lawyer said, "Well, I don't want her to do that. She can plead the fifth." And then the state was, "Well, we'll offer her immunity agreement or whatever so she can talk." But then she said, and then when we heard it from Marissa, that she didn't know what Hannah would say. So the question that everybody's kind of asking is, what is she going to say on the stand?
Yeah.
Is she going to get up there and plead the fifth to every single every question? I mean, is going to be the horrible thing of like, "What's your name? I plead the fifth," or
Right.
whatever, or like, I mean, or is it only when it's or when it gets? So anything can happen on the. I mean, somebody we know described it as an atomic bomb that could go off. It could win the war or like backfire and destroy your own country. So if she testifies, anything could happen tomorrow. Because I
It's
mean, if she
true.
goes up there
Anything
and
could happen, but from what we saw of her in her trial, I think she's gonna be vindictive. I think she's gonna do what she said she wanted to do, which was take Alec Baldwin down. That's in those recorded jail calls that she wants to see him be punished. And I think she's gonna do what she said she wanted to do, but I'm always willing to be surprised.
yeah, I mean, some of the things that she could say up there that are bad. Like, let's go with like the worst one. I think she could say, "Well, Baldwin was the one that bought us all the coke." I think
Correct.
that would be kind of the worst one. Like if she and
Yes.
like if she says, "Well, yeah, Baldwin and I smoked or whatever, snorted coke or whatever," like in between sets, that would be horribly bad for him. I
Yeah,
so
it
that one
would
would
be.
be one. That one would be one. Or she's also going to talk. Well, I would sit down with Baldwin and I'd say, "Well, okay, we're doing this set with the scene tomorrow with this gun. I need you to show you how to use it and how to test it or whatever, right?
Right.
And he's like, and he just blows her off. I think she could say that
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Say,
Yeah, I hadn't
well,
thought about that. That's a good point.
or that, and then the last one that could be is that she says, well, I told him like that morning, I told him, hey, we had a live fire yesterday. I'm
Mhm.
very worried. Like if she says something and he says, no, don't worry about it. That so there's a lot that could go wrong for Baldwin on Hannah.
Yeah, and it's the 2 things that you mentioned are kinda interesting because I don't think they would be perjury because I don't think either one of those things were said at her trial.
Well, she never
So
testified at her trial, so she doesn't. I don't think she has anything
but
for perjury.
other people did. So, if she if there's something on record sorry, my cat
Yeah,
is wanting to join the stream. If there's something, on the record that she might be contradicting, that could be a problem. But yeah, you're right. She didn't testify. So maybe she can just say whatever she wants. I mean, she is still under oath, but
correct. And the concern that the lawyer had is that one is that what she says is on record, so it can be used for impeachment. But if they give
right.
her immunity, they can't use those statements against her in a future trial. But he also said, well, she has another trial coming up in for the sticking the gun where the
Oh,
sun
does
don't
she?
shine into a bar. So like
Oh,
that. So she
okay.
was very worried that any statements he made would influence any potential jurors in the
Hmm.
future for that specific trial. So she still has that trial. And if she wins in an appeal, he says, then
Yeah.
she could go back in trial. And then all of a sudden, all this publicity. That's what he's worried about of why. But
But
we've
I
also
think that's another argument for her placing more blame on Alec Baldwin, not less blame. I mean, because she could, without really any consequences, could say, "Yeah, he told me to bring drugs onto the set," or, you know, "I did raise safety concerns," which I don't think she'll say, but she could say all of those things.
I think she'll say she. I think what she could say was that I was doing my. I mean, I was sit there. I had 5 people that I had to get guns and bullets for,
Mhm.
and Baldwin's yelling, and he's an
Yes.
A-list actor. So when he says jump, I say
Yes.
how high. And so
Very compelling.
even though they can't say he was a producer, she could certainly bring in things
Mhm.
that, hey, I didn't. Yeah, he was an actor, but I didn't consider him an actor. I thought he was a producer.
Yeah.
Like she could say, I thought he was my boss. Like she could say, I
Yeah.
thought he was my boss. That if he said, don't worry about safety instructions, that she could bypass, like because of his power. So
Yeah.
that's what she could like tell in her testimony.
Yeah. I didn't think about that, but you're right. That's a sneaky way to get the producer info in, just that he did have authority over her, whether it was him being an actor or him being a producer. I
Yeah.
mean, would convince me. She's like 10 years old, you know? And here's this experienced actor who also happens to be the producer telling you to hurry up, telling you, to do this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
Um,
So
it's gonna be wild.
her testimony will be the most key to it
Mhm.
because let's go over and just summarize again. There's 2 parts of what he's charged with the felony involuntary manslaughter. So they can show either negligence with a gun, or they could show that he was acting in such a bad way that an ordinary person could do that or would know that this would result in a bad act. So there's
Right.
slight difference because guns like, and I know like somebody else would talk about it, like there's always times where you can do bad activities in certain spots, and that's like, and like I mean
Sure.
we were talking about like Indy car racing, you can't go 200 miles on the road, but an Indy
Mm.
car race you can. So the
Right.
problem is that on a set they are using guns, and that an actor by itself does no like the whole purpose on a set is that somebody else is doing the job for you. Where
Yeah.
normally, like if I like I would also kind of be like if I go to a gun range and I pay for an hour from a not tutorial, but if I pay the range to say, hey, I don't know how to shoot, can you shoot with me for an hour and show me how to load unload the weapon? So I just shoot on the range, and they're the ones that do all the safety. Then some of the burden is off on you. But the question
Right.
that become like, so if they put the bullet in wrong and it fires and goes sideways, that's not really your fault. But the question then becomes, though, if the person at the safety range says, "Don't point that gun to the next
Right.
bay," and you point the gun to the next bay, and you pull that trigger, that's now your response. I mean, that's your responsibility now. And the
Yeah.
other one that I wanted to bring up was that, like, if you're when you're at the Indy 500, if the pace car comes out and says you now have to go 50 miles an hour, and you still try and go 200 miles an hour, would you, even though you normally could drive 200 miles an hour, if you hit somebody while the pace car was out and you ignore safety
Right.
concerns, would you still be charged with murder at, like, or manslaughter at an Indy car racing? So
Yeah.
that's a negligence of the gun. And the second one that's more is that all these things combine, like, yeah, even though you know that it's cold, but you knew that the armor and the prop master weren't doing their job.
Right.
And so and as we said, when Baldwin kind of knows that, he knew from being an actor that he shouldn't shoot at somebody. He knew even when there was a dummy, you could still kill somebody with 3 feet
Yeah.
away.
And he
And
said it. He's on video saying it.
so yeah, so those are the different ways. I mean, I still Hannah's going to Hannah tomorrow will sway it either way. Like, she may bring it up to 75. Like, right now, I think it's 15% guilt, but Hannah could sway that, like,
She
sway it
could.
either way tomorrow.
And you know, it's not like she has a cozy relationship with the person who put her in jail, right? The prosecutor. So there's no love lost there. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic, but I guess it's who she hates more. She can't put the prosecutor in jail, but she could probably put Alec Baldwin in jail.
Correct. But at the same time, the jury is going to be wondering, is she doing?
Right.
She has to be credible. But
Yeah.
some of the things
Yeah.
I think she could be, like, if she did say, "Well, we were doing coke," they could then bolster it with that one lady that said we were hiding coke. She
Right.
told me the whole hide her coke, or like, well, he was asking me to hurry up and rush my job.
Mhm.
Then show the video of him doing that,
Yeah.
bolsters her credit, like, would do it. I mean, so those are the things that she could say and do that would throw him under the bus.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
don't even think on the drug issue she'd get in trouble, right? Because you brought up a good point. She didn't testify about that. They just tried to get the set mom and the other people to speculate whether or not that was drugs or baking soda. Pretty sure it wasn't baking soda.
Yeah. Correct.
But
I think she's protected by double jeopardy on that. So, like, I think they
yeah,
found her not guilty. So,
she can say whatever she wants.
okay.
It's an interesting
Well, I
position
think
to
we're.
be
I'm
in.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
Well, I think we're about wrapped up for today. Thank
Okay.
you very much for joining me. Can you
Thanks
hang
for
out on a
having
second?
me. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to an episode of The Roundup. Be safe out there, and remember, don't do anything bad that will end up on one of my episodes.